Good evening, welcome everybody. We've got a very special treat for you tonight, not just myself, we've got my good friend Grant Page, and I'm going to formally introduce him in a minute. I do lots and lots of talks, and generally I'm not too nervous, but I am a little bit tonight. And I have a very good friend who does the history of women's distance running, and she does all these beautiful slides, and she has these amazing notes, and comes out word for word. I couldn't do that to save my life, so I've done the slides. If I do this talk again in a week, it'd be a different presentation, but there is so much beautiful, rich stuff that hopefully I'm going to share with you that hopefully you find it stimulating and interesting. So, next slide, please. So, a couple of thank yous. Thank you for everybody who's made the effort to come tonight. Thank you for Creative Colchester Partnership, Dr. Cameron Betts. Paul, I'm very disappointed that Paul didn't greet me in a sheepskin tonight. I don't think he's
I don't think I've earned it yet.
Grant, who's very kindly agreed to be my wingman tonight, which means he'll just sort of prompt and help out, which is brilliant. And my son Shay, who's come from the university in Ipswich and is recording this, because I've got friends like the Everton historian who's just messaged me to say, oh, is it being recorded, Steve? So, yeah, so fabulous. So, next slide. Oh, can we go back one slide? Sorry, I've already mucked it up, haven't I? Sterling, I'm going to introduce you not just to this isn't about just about women's football, this is about the beautiful Sterling world that was, it was a men and women working together in a time of great need. It's a beautiful story, and a lot of the narratives out there about women's football history are, people like the BBC and ITV and all that, they're very negative. This is not a negative story. It's a beautiful story in dark times, and hopefully I'm going to really enjoy sharing that with you. Sterling Telephone Factory, and I'll come on to this a bit later, was one of the most important factories in this country in World War I, and that story really isn't out there. So I actually have my own, and it's got a couple of bits missing, a bit after that's an original Sterling telephone. This bad boy popped up on eBay the other day, and that's an original Sterling telephone. They're beautifully made, and but a little bit about my pocket range, so I can get hold of that one, but I just thought I'd share that one. Right, next slide, please. So we're going to do this quite informally, it's we're not going to do audience participation necessarily, but what we're going to do, I'm going to do a sort of roughly 40-45 minutes talk, then we'll have a longish break, and please, help yourself to a drink, come down and mingle, talk to ourselves, good chance to talk to Grant, look at all the exhibits, there's loads there to see, ask questions, etc. And then when everybody's sort of settled back down in the chairs, we'll get going with a proper Q&A, which Paul is going to sort of compare for us. So that's the aim of the evening, and so it's going to go very flat if you don't participate and ask some questions. Okay, next one, please. So I'm a head of maths in the pupil referral unit down the road, and I know I've said 3 main parts, and there's 4 3 main parts. So the 4th one is a little bit about the exhibition. So the slides really are more of rather than loads of text and stuff. Hopefully they're visually stimulating, but they're more to keep me on the rightish sort of path rather than wandering off Ronnie Corbett-esque on that. So we'll do 3 main parts, which will be the context. And one of the things that I do in my talks and my research, and I could have done 35 slides, this is Steve Bolton, this is what I've done, this is what I've achieved. I don't want to bore you, but I have quite a different narrative to what you'll see out there on the internet and in the media. And one of the challenges with women's football history is, if we say compare it to men's football history, if I talk about Manchester United, I don't have to explain who Benfica was, I don't have to explain there was a European Cup. Women's football, it's so little known, the history, that if you're not careful, an evening like this, I could spend the next 2 hours just doing the context and not get to what the talk is. So I'm going to try and whip through and give you an overview of the context, and if there's anything you think, oh, I don't get that, you've got the Q&A to sort of dig in a bit deeper. Guy Burney, how that man doesn't have statues and OBE and whatever, he was the factory, he was a man ahead of his time, and I had the great fortune to spend an afternoon with his granddaughter, and he set up the Sterling World. The Sterling World was his, and the reason why the women's football came about, and so on and so forth. So I really want to introduce you to that. And then number 3 is a little bit about my involvement with the original Invincibles play with Amanda Whittington when it was commissioned a couple of years ago. I had 17 months working with Amanda as one of the top playwrights in the country. It was a really amazing experience, and I'll share some anecdotes about that. So, and then just a couple of little vinaigrettes about the pointers for what you might look at the exhibition. Right, next slide please. I am very, very proud to announce, so if you do anything or know anything about the history of women's football, the most famous women's footballer of all time is Lily Parr. She played for the world famous Dick Kerr ladies. That's Lily Parr there with my granny. She is the first woman to have a statue in the National Football Museum. I met Lily Parr one time. I can't say I knew her, but I was introduced to her. She was my granny's best mate. My granny took over the captaincy from her, etc., etc. And St Helens, which is, for those of you who know it up north, is basically rugby town. They've had a scheme called Inspiring Sporting Women in St Helens. My granny and Lily Parr were part of that, and 2 weekends ago, myself and my 2 lovely cousins were there with the mayor for an unveiling of gold plaques for my granny and Lily Parr. And the 2 old friends are back together again, and it was a beautiful, I can't tell you how amazing that was. And unusually, because you don't see much of Lily Parr's relatives, she never married, and you might see one every 5 years. Something. I had to put St Helens Council in touch with a Lily Parr relative that I knew of, and 3 of them rocked up to this. So there was 3 of our family and 3 of Lily Parr's family. There's never been such a gathering of relatives of Lily Parr, and so it's a beautiful experience. So next slide, please. So one of the things that I think we really need to bear in mind with this story is how women's football came about, and it was in a time of total war. Anything was acceptable. If bodies were being sacrificed on the front, women could wear skimpy shorts, they could endanger their bodies for motherhood, compared to men dying on the front. You know, it was total war, everybody was giving everything, and that's partly why there was such a burgeoning of women's football in the First World War. That's Guy Burney there. That's Mrs. Burney. How can I put this? I'm trying to think of a really politically correct way of putting this. No, but I directly got this from in quite some detail from the granddaughter, that the way to keep Mr. Burney happy was to keep Mrs. Burney happy. And when you know that, and you see the sort of pictures of the women footballers giving a great big bunch of flowers and stuff, it kind of triangulates. It's quite good fun. And I'll come on to this topic a little more, but you start to see that Maud Reader at the front there, we've looked into her heritage, and this is quite a bit of help from my friend Grant here, because there are similarities with Sir Alf. I'll come on to that in a second. Note to self, put phone on silent. She is of Gypsy Roman traveller heritage, and so I've been in touch with her granddaughter or great niece, or
yes, great niece.
Great niece, who's done the family tree, and so there's more to come there, because she's the first really high profile woman football from that heritage that we've come across. Right, next slide please. So, Grant, do you want, come on, you step in. Whilst I speak to my phone, do you want to explain who you are and what you do?
Okay, so like Steve, I'm educated by background, I've taught a lot. Always loved my history. Do you love my maths as well? As long as they're 7 years old, because I can't cope with it. 6 years ago, I started doing some research on Alf Ramsey, and that's kind of grown into a book. And there were several seeds for starting that research. And one of them was his childhood nickname, which I read about in the previous really good biography that came out in 2006. Mine came out about 6 months ago. And I'd grown up. I was 9 years old when England won the FA Cup. So I'd sort of grown up as a teenager watching Alf Ramsey. And he always came across to me as a very conventional sort of person. So I was pretty astounded to find out that he had a racist nickname. I thought, how does that work? He's always looked to me just like a sort of conventional middle-class, middle-aged white guy. But he had what is a racist nickname. I'll talk about it a bit later. And that got me interested in his heritage. And that's one of the things that's connected Steve's work and mine. And through, as we were talking about, the Reader family, because the Reader family lived literally about 10 yards away from the Ramsey family. The Reader family had Gypsy, Roma, Traveller backgrounds. Her Maud Reader's, I think, great aunt was a Gypsy, Roma, Traveller background from North Essex.
No.
Yeah. And Alf Ramsey lived next door to the Readers, and it's really interesting because Alf doesn't come from from an East End background, he comes from a country background. And that's where the Gypsy, Roma, Traveller heritage threads come in, both for some of what we sing about Maud and what we'll perhaps talk a bit about Alf later. So.
Thank you, Grant. So, right. One more quick thing before. It's okay. That slide's fine. The other. Are you going to talk about the Ipswich play, or is that later on?
I'll mention that later on.
Later on.
Yeah.
Okay. So, some context. So, a little bit of a trigger warning. A lot of what I'm going to say over the next few minutes is my view of women's football history, and it disagrees completely with stuff you will see there. But hopefully here I've got some bits of evidence. So I'll give you an example. I sat down to watch the Women's World Cup a couple of years ago, and they put 3 minutes of history of women's football. Oh no. And it comes on, and these nasty men banned the women in 1921. There was a ban in 1921. And they played in parks and so on and so forth. It disappeared and it came back in 1971. That's my granny's entire career. I was throwing things at the telly. I was so annoyed. You kind of just take a little look at what I found in the 1930s, or you take a look at the Chelmsford ladies, 1950, first 5 games, average 4,000. Women's football didn't disappear. It's a very patronising thing to say about women, but there we go. Yes, there was a ban, and yes, it shouldn't have happened, but I think it was an element of the time. And I'll talk about that a bit more later, but there is a warning there, because, you know, more than once or twice, somebody's got quite upset because they followed the narrative, and I don't want to sound like one of those Saturday TV starlets. I've been on a journey, but in a sense I have, because my granny played most of her career under the ban, and 10 years ago I would have swallowed those narratives, but as I've become a women's football historian, I've looked at this more and more. And I thought, no, this isn't correct. This is a far richer, far more subtle story. So, next slide, please. So, so this is I've probably got the world's best collection of women's football memorabilia. I've got match programmes going back to 1921. I've got one with my granny in it in 1933, where she's a linesman. I've got one of her playing in 1923. But I've also got rare postcards going back to 1895, and they do tell a story, really. So in the original run of the Invincibles at the Queen's Theatre in Hornchurch, we used that postcard as a feedback card, and it was really interesting when I came to analyse them, and I got them all out of the tin at the end, because the adults that had come to see the play have put all fantastic play, etc., etc., hidden story, amazing, and then the bunch of young girls had been brought in from the young girls, and they didn't see the irony, they were outraged, they were like, girls, stop playing football! They were really strident about it, so that did amuse me. So I have the original of that. Next slide, please. So, I started off this journey, if you like, because I am the grandson of Lizzie Ashcroft, and that's her 1934 Bolton Agricultural Show. Although my name is Bolton, it's not personalised like that. It was the Agricultural Show at Bolton, and they were playing basically the Belgian national side, and so my granny would have been given that. Either that or she had a prize heifer in the show, but I don't think so. I think that was that. And then this is one of the things, when I showed you that picture of my two cousins, one is my lovely older cousin Leslie, I've known since I was that big. In fact, I used to call her Lanky Leslie, and she comes to here now. So, but the other cousin is from St Helens, and I know I'm related to half of St Helens, but my family migrated to Preston. And I got a message, sort of an email, this was about 5 or 6 years ago. Hi Steve, you might not know me, you don't know me, but I think we're related. I'm Blardy Blah Ashcroft, and I grew up worshipping Auntie Lizzie, the footballer, and I've read one of your articles. And so we've got together, we've met. My son Shay came up when they did the Strong Woman mural with my granny and Lily Parr on it, and looked after him for the day. And so I've reconnected with that side of the family. Similarly, I had an email just about 2 years ago now. I don't know if you can see that medal. It's a silver medal, and it says Dick Kerr's AFC versus Rest of England, Swansea, August 1931, E. Ashcroft, and it's hallmark silver. And that was another very distant relative in St Helens who had that in an old box of tut, and they just sort of contacted me and said, I've got this silver medal. So I still haven't managed to connect with this very busy lady, but yeah, so somewhere is this silver medal, and it wasn't known that they got silver medals in, so I would like to meet up with her and have an absolute look at that. Next slide, please. So, as I say, I did try to stop myself doing 23rd side. I've done this and I've done that, but I do end up, I've got 100 Lever Arts files tracking over 100 teams over the last 100 years of women's football. Women's football is a massive, massive untold story, and we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Despite the bans, despite the barriers, there was an awful lot of women's football taking place. There was a lot of magnificent teams. And that's one of an interesting cartoon I came across in the newspaper. In the 20s and 30s and earlier, there was an idea of this Amazonian woman, and Amazonian was not a very complimentary phrase. There's no sort of de jure definition of it, but basically it was an overly muscular, overly aggressive, socially overly aggressive woman, and it was this idea coming from the Victorian era that women should sort of know their place, if you like, and there's all sorts of implications in that cartoon. I'm sure a sociologist could spend hours deconstructing it and writing an essay. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is women's football history according to myself. So I think there were, and my evidence backs this up, there were two golden eras. I just add a little caveat. There was women's football in Victorian era, but the 1895 games and so on and so forth. And I don't really want to go into too much depth about that because we just haven't got the time tonight. But it was portrayed, the famous 1895 game at Crouch End, as a sort of upper middle class thing. And Victorian society had this sort of dichotomy, if you like. If a woman climbed a mountain and did an amazing feat like that, if she was upper middle class, she was showing pluck and amazing fortitude, whatever. If it was a working class woman, she was damaging her body for motherhood. There was this sort of different ways of looking at the different classes, if you like. And so, when in the 1895 games, they will portray the British ladies as being a middle class thing, and they weren't really. They were music hall, and so it's a sociological phenomenon to me more than a football phenomenon. So I start women's football, the first golden era in World War One, and you've got, and I think this is an underestimate, over 1,000 games by over 250 teams. You will see again, and watch out for this because it will happen next year with the World Cup. The pioneers of women's football were the Dick Kerr ladies. Well, they weren't. Their first game, this is the famous Northern team, in 1917, the North East was having its 115th game and it was an international. They were famous in Preston. They were in the Preston newspaper quite a lot. But the Sterlings were in the Daily Mirror and the New York Herald, and they were filmed 4 times. So, and this is again, and people like the London Museum and the Imperial War Museum have started doing stuff about women's football and they start ganching on about the 1921 ban. Well, women's football basically disappeared in 1919 due to the end of the war, and I have not found any evidence anywhere that the FA had anything to do with the end of the First World War, or indeed that the women were upset. Because if you were, and I'm trying to imagine myself as a young 14-year-old working class woman 100 years ago, not the easiest thing, I must admit, but your main aspiration in life would be, I think, to find a decent bloke, get married, have the family, and then the war came. So your life's been put on hold for 5 years. So when the war's finished, and the Sterlings, the bits of research I've done, Maud Smith, their superstar, disappeared after the first season, so 1979-18 season. I thought something had happened to her. I just found one little line. She married a tennis coach. There was a, I think a lot of them just got married and got on with their lives. And then a bit like we've done with COVID, you're thinking, did that really happen to me? So that's my view. But there seems to want to fit this to the banning narrative. So, and I disagree with that completely. And then you've got a second golden era. And that's 1920-21 season. The Dick Kerr ladies then became superstars. 55 games undefeated, 1 draw against the French national side, and that is when, in December, the famous ban came in, the infamous ban that lasted 50 years. But that ban should not even be mentioned in the same breath as the Sterlings. There's nothing to do with the Sterlings, I think. Right, next slide, please. So I do stuff like this for academic conferences. So I don't know if you can see the chart, but basically you can see 1919, almost all references to ladies football disappear. This is British Newspaper Archive. So there's the pricey. And you've got 2 different reasons. You've got the total war during the first golden era, and then 1920-21, we've got a completely broken country, and the women's football is a great way of raising money. Right, next slide, please. So maybe some of these come back to in the Q&A if you're interested. So I will try and briefly answer them. So when were we ready for widespread women's football as a society? My view is 1967. I think that's what the evidence supports, post the 1966 World Cup. And that's when you see leagues forming, particularly in the West Midlands. I'm not saying there weren't barriers, there were still tremendous barriers, but that's when you see a sort of a growth of women's football. Why did women's football blossom over 100 years ago? Well, it's total war. Total war, that's what it was. And that the munitionettes were, they replaced the men in the factories, and it was seen as a good way of keeping fit, but also morality, keep them occupied, so they don't, so that was the first golden era. The second golden era, there's a lot of stuff out there about that I disagree with. They're helping striking minds and stuff. No, people like the Dick Kerr ladies, they're too smart for that. They needed the elite of society, so they would support the mayor's fund for poor kids, which might go to the same kids But there was a very different type of football in 1921 and 1926 called pea soup football, and that was where the miners' wives would play on